The wind was ruthless that evening, slicing through the empty streets of Baltimore like it had something to prove. Snow drifted down in thick silence, dulling the city's usual hum. Streetlights blinked in exhaustion, casting long shadows on the icy pavement. It was nearly 9 p.m., and at a half-deserted bus stop beneath a trembling street lamp, a man named Samuel stood motionless. He was 47. Former structural engineer, widower, father, and for the time being homeless. His jacket, a faded army green thing he'd worn since college, barely held back the wind. In his arms, he clutched a worn-out folder, its edges curled and soft with time. Inside were 5 printed resumes, each one carefully updated, each one returned with silence. Samuel exhaled. A fog of breath rose in the frozen air, vanishing like everything else he used to hold close. He glanced at the red pharmacy sign across the street. 8:53 p.m. The bus was late. The snow didn't care. His boots were soaked through, the damp seeping into his socks like ice water. He shifted from one foot to the other, not to move forward, just to survive a little longer in place. Then he heard the sharp click of heels. From the blur of snowfall, a figure appeared, a woman in her early 30s, dressed like she had just walked out of a boardroom. Pencil skirt, blouse, no coat. Her hair was wet, clinging to her cheeks. She wrapped her arms around herself, shivering hard. She stood beside him under the awning, her breath jagged, her hands rubbing together in vain. Her polished exterior clashed violently with her vulnerability, and Samuel couldn't help but notice. He looked away, people came and went. He didn't expect to remember her face. But the wind howled again, an unkind gust that made her recoil. She hugged herself tighter, visibly trembling. And that's when Samuel did something most people wouldn't. He took off his jacket. It wasn't a good jacket. The seams were fraying and it barely kept him warm anymore. But it was all he had. He held it out without a word. She looked at him, startled. "You don't have to do that," she said softly, her voice cracking. Samuel offered a tired smile. "I've already lost more than I can count. This coat's about the only thing I've got left to give." She hesitated. "But you need it more than I do." He didn't argue, he gently draped it over her shoulders. "Not tonight," he said. The jacket was heavy, damp, but it carried a strange warmth. It smelled faintly of laundry soap and coffee. Something familiar, something like home. "Thank you," she whispered. Samuel nodded, folding his arms tight against his chest to keep the cold out. They stood in silence, strangers against a storm, wrapped in something unspoken. After a long pause, she turned to him. "What's your name?" "Samuel. I'm Elise." He smiled. "Nice to meet you, Elise." "You shouldn't have given me your jacket," she murmured. He looked back at her, eyes weary but calm. "Maybe not. But I couldn't let you freeze." Moments later, the bus arrived, headlights glowing through the snowfall like ghosts. Elise stepped toward it, then paused. "Do you have somewhere to go?" Samuel shrugged. "Somewhere," he said. She reached into her purse and handed him a business card. "In case you ever need anything." He took it, slipping it into his folder with quiet resignation. He'd heard that before, from well-meaning strangers with warm apartments and warmer intentions that melted away by morning. He didn't expect her to remember. She stepped onto the bus, glanced back once, then disappeared into the white. And just like that, Samuel was alone again. He stood, trembling not just from the cold, but from something else, something soft, invisible, and powerful. A flicker, he turned his eyes toward the sky, then back to the empty street. "Maybe tomorrow," he whispered. Then he walked into the night. That night, Samuel returned to his shelter, not a home, not even a room, but the back seat of a rusted 2002 Dodge truck parked behind an old mechanic's warehouse on the edge of the city. He reached it just past 9:30. The lock was frozen. He jiggled it until it clicked open. Inside, it smelled like mildew and old upholstery. The heater hadn't worked in years. The driver's seat was layered with 2 thin blankets, a camping pillow, and an empty thermos. A tin lunchbox sat under the dash. He climbed in, closed the door, and sat in silence. From the glove compartment, he pulled out a tin box. Inside was a photograph, wrinkled at the corners, soft from being touched too many times. It showed a woman with laughing eyes and a little boy with a lopsided grin. The edges of the photo were smudged with time. "Good night, Leela," he whispered. "Good night, Jonah." They were his whole life once. Leela, his wife, a kindergarten teacher with a voice like music and a smile that never flinched even when the cancer came. She was gone in less than a year, Jonah was their son. 8 years old, quiet, kind, a dreamer, Samuel had given up his career to care for them. He had sold everything, first the house, then the furniture, then the tools, and in the end, none of it was enough. After Leela passed, he and Jonah moved from apartment to apartment, each one smaller than the last, until all that was left was the truck. He kept it clean. He made the back seat into a spaceship filled with stories and warmth. He made dinner with canned soup and imagination. He walked Jonah to school every morning, shirt tucked in, shoes shined, as if everything was still okay. A shelter worker once asked him, "Why do you still cut your hair every week?" Samuel had smiled and said, "Because my son needs to believe things can still get better. And I need to look like I believe it too." He took every job he could, moving boxes, scrubbing floors, fixing fences. It was never enough, but it was something, until last autumn. A social worker decided Jonah needed more. Stability, a real roof. Samuel didn't fight, he knew she was right. He hugged his son, kissed his forehead, and promised, "Just for now, I'll come back for you." Every night since had been a battle. He applied to job after job, went to free career workshops, spent afternoons at the public library studying building codes. He was building something again, not with concrete, but with hope. But some nights like this one, that hope felt like fiction. He sat in the truck, rubbing his arms, thinking of the woman in the skirt and heels who had taken his coat. Why had he done it? Maybe because she reminded him of Leela, or maybe he just needed to feel human again, to feel like someone who still had something to give. Outside, the snow kept falling. Inside, Samuel pulled a blanket over his shoulders and leaned against the cold glass window. He didn't have much, but he still had himself, and for tonight, that would have to be enough. Elise's heart stepped into the polished marble lobby of her luxury high-rise. The warmth inside clung to her like a memory. Outside, the city still groaned under snowfall, but here, everything gleamed, spotless, clinical, quiet. She barely nodded to the doorman. Her heels clicked softly against the stone floor as she crossed to the elevator, the oversized coat hanging awkwardly from her shoulders. Samuel's coat. She hadn't meant to take it, had tried to refuse. But he'd insisted. Now it enveloped her like armor. It was too big, too worn, but far warmer than anything she'd worn in years. She entered her penthouse on the 26th floor. No lights were on, no sound. No voice welcoming her home, only silence. A refrigerator hummed in the distance. The glow of city lights spilled through glass walls. She set her purse down slowly, and then paused. Her hand brushed something in the coat's inside pocket. She reached in, her fingers closed around a folded piece of paper. Worn, delicate, clearly handled often. Curious, she pulled it out and unfolded it gently. It was a child's drawing, 2 stick figures. One tall, labeled Dad, one smaller, labeled Me. They stood beneath a crooked yellow sun, a red heart floating between them. At the bottom, in large crayon letters, "I love you, Daddy, Jonah." Elise stared. Everything inside her stopped. The drawing trembled in her hands as the edges of her vision blurred. She sat down, the couch cold beneath her. The coat slipped from her shoulders, but she clutched the drawing to her chest. Jonah. The name sank like a pebble into the deep well of her memory. She saw the man again, his tired smile, his soft voice. The way he held his folder like it was the last thing holding him together. That wasn't just a man offering a coat. That was a father clinging to the last trace of his child. She looked around her penthouse. Everything was perfect. Polished stone countertops, art on the walls, smart lighting that changed with the time of day. But there were no photographs. No souvenirs, no clutter, no warmth, only success. And somewhere along the way, she had mistaken that for home. The drawing was still in her hands. Without realizing it, Elise wrapped the coat back around herself and hugged it. It smelled like soap and something deeper, something she hadn't known she missed. Then, like a dam breaking, the tears came. She cried, really cried. For the first time since she was a little girl, she had forgotten how. She remembered sitting on the cold church steps at 10 years old, her hands numb, her stomach empty. Her foster home had locked her out. She had nowhere to go. She remembered the moment a stranger, an old man with a worn jacket and eyes full of gentleness, placed his coat around her shoulders. He hadn't asked her name, he hadn't said much, he just stayed. That moment had changed everything. She never saw him again, but his kindness carved a path forward. It gave her the strength to survive foster care, to fight for scholarships, to work through college, to build her own tech company, Hartwell Systems, from the back room of a public library. And now, all these years later, another stranger had done the same. He had nothing, yet he gave, and she had everything, yet she had forgotten what it meant to give. The next morning, Elise sat in her corner office, the highest floor of the glass tower that bore her company's name. The skyline stretched out before her, but her eyes were on the drawing in her hand. She had barely slept. Her coffee sat untouched. The colors of the crayon were soft from wear, but the meaning was sharp, immediate, undeniable. She picked up the small silver bell on her desk and rang it once. Moments later, her assistant entered. "Yes, Miss Hart. I need your help finding someone." The assistant blinked. "Of course, who?" "His name is Samuel, no last name. He was at the West Point and Irvington bus stop last night around 8:45 p.m. He gave me this coat." She held up the jacket. "I want to find him." The assistant hesitated but nodded. "Understood." Discreetly. Completely. For the next few days, Elise's top-level staff, usually tasked with locating CEOs, hiring engineers, tracking market trends, redirected their skills. They scoured traffic footage, rewatched transit camera logs, narrowed down the timeline, cross-referenced passengers, dug into local shelter records and employment forums, and then one image, one thread, a name, Samuel Reeves, once a respected structural engineer. No recent work history, no criminal record. A LinkedIn page last updated 6 years ago, a construction license expired. No address, but one of Elise's staff spotted him again behind an old warehouse in East Baltimore. An aging pickup truck, rusted, snowed in. He had been living there. Elise didn't wait. She didn't send someone in her place. This wasn't a press opportunity. It wasn't charity. This was personal. She dressed simply, asked for no attention, stepped into a black sedan and headed out of the comfort of glass towers and marble floors into the edges of the city where names and stories often disappeared. The car rolled to a stop near the warehouse. She stepped out. The cold bit her immediately. The truck was there, still covered in snow, still unmoved. She walked slowly toward it, her heels crunching the gravel. Inside, through the windshield, she could see him, hunched in the front seat, his head down. Then the door opened. He stepped out. Samuel blinked against the daylight. When he saw her, his eyes widened, not with recognition but confusion. "Elise." She offered a small smile. "Hi, Samuel." He looked down at his boots, the snow, the truck, his wrinkled shirt. Embarrassment flickered across his face. "What are you doing here?" "I came to find you." "Why?" She didn't answer immediately, then softly, "Because I couldn't stop thinking about what you did. About who you are." Samuel crossed his arms. "You didn't have to track me down for that. A thank you card would have done fine." "It's not about thanks," she said. "It's about not letting something good disappear without being seen." For a moment, they just stood there, two people from two different worlds, standing in the cold where a simple act of kindness had once bridged an impossible distance. Samuel exhaled. "You came all this way for that." Elise nodded, "And maybe something more." The next time Samuel saw Elise, he was hauling cinder blocks at a construction site in northeast Baltimore. She had waited, parked quietly down the block in an unmarked sedan, watching from the shadows of her tinted window as he worked. He moved with the rhythm of someone used to heavy things, both the ones in his hands and the ones no one else could see. He didn't talk much, didn't stop, just lifted, stacked, carried. Snow clung to his sleeves, dust clung to his boots. When he finally sat down on a low wall to catch his breath, she stepped out of the car. Samuel glanced up. Did a double take. She was holding 2 cups of coffee. "Elise," he said, slowly rising. "Hi again. I figured you could use something warm." He took the cup hesitantly, his eyes searching hers. "You really didn't have to come out here." "I know," she said, "but I wanted to." They stood in silence for a moment. She sipped her coffee, watching him. "Would you come with me?" she asked suddenly. Samuel raised an eyebrow. "Just for a bit," she continued. "I want to show you something." He looked over his shoulder at the foreman in the distance. "I've still got 3 hours on shift." "I already talked to him," she said calmly. "Told him you had an interview." He smirked. "I don't have an interview." "You do now." Samuel let out a breath, not quite a laugh, more like disbelief. "Okay," he said. "Let's see what this is." They drove in silence, her behind the wheel this time. The city passed them by in a blur of brick and snow, bridges and shadows. Samuel fidgeted in the passenger seat, aware of the dust on his jeans, the state of his boots, the grease on his fingertips. He didn't ask where they were going, and she didn't say, until they pulled up to Hartwell Systems headquarters, a sleek tower of glass and steel that seemed to scrape the clouds. Samuel's jaw tightened. "This isn't for me," he said under his breath. Elise didn't flinch, just come upstairs. Inside, the lobby was all glass and chrome and clean lines. People in tailored suits moved like clockwork, barely noticing the man in second-hand denim and a work jacket. Samuel stood with his hands in his pockets, shrinking beneath the lights. "I don't belong here," he murmured. "Neither did I once," Elise said. They took a private elevator to the 27th floor. A quiet conference room waited for them, all windows and air and too much space. She gestured to a chair. He sat and waited, then said, "Okay, so what is this really about, returning the coat?" Elise shook her head. "No. That coat is mine now." Samuel blinked. She leaned forward. "This isn't about thanks. I brought you here because you made me remember something I'd forgotten, something important." Samuel frowned. "You reminded me," she continued, "that real change doesn't always come from data or strategies. Sometimes it comes from something as quiet as a person doing the right thing, even when no one's watching." She slid a folder across the table. He stared at it, then slowly opened it. Inside was a proposal, a job offer, a role that didn't exist until now, Cultural and Human Values Advisor. Samuel flipped through the pages. The salary, the title, the responsibilities. "I don't understand," he said. "It's a new position," she explained. "One I designed for you. You'd work with every department, sit in on meetings, help guide decisions from a human standpoint. You've lived through what most people here can't even imagine." He shook his head. "Elise, I live in a truck. I don't have a psychology degree. I haven't built anything in years." "You built a moment I'll never forget," she said gently. "This is crazy," he muttered. "It's not charity," she said, "it's clarity." Samuel looked away, his hands trembling slightly. "I'm not qualified," he whispered. "You don't need a resume," she said, her voice firm. "You live the things most people only talk about. You don't need credentials to teach people how to be kind." Her gaze locked onto his. "You've already done more than any consultant we've ever paid. You reminded me of the power in simply being present. That's not something you learn in a classroom." Samuel said nothing. His throat was tight. His fingers ran over the folder's edge like it was made of fire. Eventually, Elise stood. "You don't have to decide right now, but just know I see you, Samuel, and I believe in what you bring, not in spite of where you've been, but because of it." Then she left the room, and he was alone. Samuel sat there for a long time, staring out at the city. He hadn't felt like this in years. It wasn't fear, it wasn't shame, it was something harder, hope. He carried the folder with him down to the lobby. Outside, snow still drifted, but the wind had softened. He sat on a bench near the front, folder unopened. His thoughts spiraled. "She's just being kind. This won't last. I'll screw it up. People like me don't get endings like that." Then, out of nowhere, Elise appeared beside him again. "You didn't read it," she said gently. Samuel shrugged. "Didn't need to. I already know how this ends." "Do you?" "Yeah. People like me don't belong in places like this." Elise was quiet for a moment, then said, "Come with me one more place, no suits, no meetings, just trust." He hesitated and then stood. They drove for over 30 minutes away from the towers, past the river, into a neighborhood built with brick and history. Eventually, they pulled up to a red building with peeling paint and a hand-painted sign that read, "Thomas's Place, a safe space for every child." Elise led him inside. The air smelled of crayons, fresh bread, something warm and alive. The walls were covered in murals, paper hearts, messy paintings. Down the hallway, the sound of children laughing bounced off the walls. They passed a kitchen, a reading room, a play space full of beanbags and blankets and joy. "This place," Elise whispered, "was named after the man who saved me." Samuel turned to her. "When I was a kid," she said, "I was homeless, in and out of bad foster homes. I ran away once. It was freezing. I curled up on the steps of a church, convinced the night would swallow me." She paused, then someone came. "He didn't ask my name, he didn't say much. He just gave me his coat and stayed." She looked at Samuel. "You remind me of him. Not because of what you gave me," she added silently, "but because of who you are." Samuel didn't speak. He couldn't. The warmth in the room pressed against him like a memory. Children laughed from down the hallway. A young boy ran past with a volunteer in tow, his giggle echoing like sunlight. Elise touched Samuel's arm. I didn't bring you here to impress you, she said. I brought you here because this is what matters. This is what you understand better than anyone. He blinked slowly. The coat was still wrapped around her like it had never left his shoulders. I don't need someone who speaks in boardrooms, Samuel, she continued. I need someone who speaks from the heart. You don't have to impress anyone. You've already reminded me what real leadership looks like. He nodded once slowly. Not for the job, not for the money, but for the first time in a long time, Samuel felt like he belonged somewhere. He was still needed, still capable, still human. Samuel's first day at Hartwell Systems didn't come with headlines or handshakes. No press release, no flashy welcome. It started in a small glass office on the 5th floor with a few department heads and a stack of sticky notes. Elise introduced him plainly. This is Samuel Reeves. He's here to help us build something bigger than profit. There were glances, confused, cautious, some skeptical, but Samuel didn't shrink. He stood tall, not in posture, but in presence, and simply began sharing his story. Not as a victim. Not as a hero, just real. He talked about what it felt like to lose everything. To try shaving in gas station bathrooms before interviews so no one would know he slept in a truck. To show up anyway. To choose kindness anyway. The room shifted. They leaned in. By the end of the first week, people were visiting his small office, interns at first, then junior staff, then team leads. Some came to talk, others came to sit. A few just needed someone to see them. And Samuel, he listened. He didn't offer quick fixes, he offered truth. One day, a young engineer confessed to him, voice breaking, I haven't slept in 3 nights, I think I'm failing. Samuel didn't blink. You're not broken, he said. You're just tired. Being tired doesn't mean you're weak. It means you've cared too long without someone caring back. That sentence spread like wildfire. It was printed on office mugs, taped to cubicles, quoted in company-wide emails. Samuel didn't notice. He just kept showing up, one honest conversation at a time. Outside of work, life began to rebuild slowly, quietly. With Elise's help and a housing stipend from the company, Samuel made a down payment on a modest 1-bedroom home in the edge of town. It had cracked floorboards, a rusty mailbox, and a porch that creaked, but it had 4 solid walls and a roof that didn't leak. Most importantly, it had room for Jonah. Now a freshman at a community college nearby, Jonah moved back in. Their first dinner in that house was spaghetti and garlic bread. Simple, ordinary, but Samuel would remember that night for the rest of his life. You kept your promise, Jonah said, looking at his father with tears in his eyes. Samuel couldn't answer, not with words, but the look in his eyes said everything. As for Elise and Samuel, what started as collaboration turned into friendship. What began as lunch meetings became quiet subway rides home, then came weekend coffee, walks under city lights, shared silences, shared laughter. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't rushed, it just grew. They found comfort in one another's presence, not the kind that demands, but the kind that sees. One afternoon, standing on the rooftop of the Hartwell building, watching the sun melt behind the skyline, Elise turned to him and said softly, You've changed this place. Samuel smiled. No, I just reminded them what they already knew. She looked at him, her eyes warm. You reminded me too. Then came a moment neither of them expected. It was after a small workshop Samuel led on resilience. A young man, no more than 22, lingered behind as everyone else filed out. His hands shook, his voice cracked. I just wanted to say last month I was going to quit. Not work life. Samuel held his breath. But then I heard you speak, the man continued. You said something about how people don't need to be fixed, they just need to be heard. He swallowed. No one had ever said that to me before. He paused. If it weren't for you, I don't think I'd still be here. Samuel's throat tightened. He stepped forward, placed a gentle hand on the young man's shoulder. I'm really glad you are. The young man nodded, then left, and Samuel stood there quiet, still. He once wondered if he'd ever matter again. Now he knew the atrium of Hartwell Systems had never looked like this. Gone were the banners for quarterly metrics and product launches. In their place, soft white drapes, strands of warm lights, and a sign that read in gentle script, One Kindness Day. Employees gathered shoulder to shoulder. Not in suits but in warmth. Laughter echoed. Someone brought hot cider. Elise stepped to the podium. She took a breath. This day isn't about numbers, she began, it's about moments. She looked around. A year ago, I was standing at a bus stop. Alone, freezing, a man I'd never met offered me his only coat. The crowd murmured. It was old, frayed, but it was everything, because it reminded me kindness doesn't wait for convenience. It shows up when the world least expects it. She turned and lifted the cloth from a frame beside her. Inside, protected behind glass, was Samuel's coat. Faded, torn, sacred, a small plaque beneath it read, "One small act of kindness can rewrite a life." Elise's voice trembled. That moment didn't just change my night, it changed the course of my life. Then she turned to the crowd. "Samuel, would you come up here?" He stood slowly, dressed in a borrowed suit, his back straight, his heart full. The room erupted in applause. When he reached her, Elise reached into her pocket and handed him a small envelope. "This belongs to you," she said. Inside, the deed to his new house. Gasps. "No more sleeping in trucks," she whispered with a smile. Samuel blinked hard, then he reached into his own pocket, pulled out a small box. Simple, worn. "I kept this in the pocket of that coat," he said softly, "because I was waiting for the moment I believed in life again." He opened it, inside a ring, not flashy, just quietly beautiful. "Elise," he said, voice shaking, "you said that coat changed your life, but you changed mine." He knelt. "Will you marry me?" There was a beat, then laughter, then tears, then, "Yes, of course, yes." The crowd stood, cheered, people cried. And Samuels, who had once believed life was over, held the hand of the woman who helped him begin again. The wedding wasn't held in a grand ballroom or on the rooftop of a luxury hotel. It wasn't catered by a five-star chef or featured in a lifestyle magazine. Instead, it took place in the place where everything had begun again. Thomas's place. The red brick building that had once cradled Elise when she was a child lost in the world now became the backdrop for a new beginning. The chairs didn't match. The lights were simple strings of warm yellow. The music was a Bluetooth speaker with a hand-picked playlist. The decorations were paper flowers made by the children, but it was perfect. Elise wore a soft white dress, modest, elegant, timeless. Her hair fell naturally over her shoulders. No diamonds, no veil, just presence. Samuel wore the same suit he had worn at the One Kindness Day ceremony, this time with a boutonniere made of wildflowers clipped from the garden out back. Noah stood at his father's side as best man. Elise's assistant Rachel cried the entire time. The guests, not executives or investors, they were people who mattered, volunteers from the community center. Young employees who had once sat in Samuel's small office, searching for peace. Social workers who'd helped bring Jonah home. Even the man who'd printed Samuel's first new resume stood near the back, holding his wife's hand. There were no speeches written in advance, just vows spoken from the heart. Elise held Samuel's weathered hands, looked into his eyes, and said, "Once you gave me a coat when I had nothing but silence. Tonight I give you everything I am. My life, my future, my hope." Her words settled over the room like light through stained glass. Samuel's voice shook, but his words were steady. "You believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. You saw past everything I had lost and helped me find what still lived inside me. You gave me back my name, my purpose, my son, and a reason to start again. And now I give you all of me without fear, without hiding." The room was silent, a silence thick with presence, not absence. Then applause, laughter, music. Children ran barefoot through the courtyard. The cake was baked by a young intern who'd recently found housing thanks to the employee wellness program Samuel had helped build. No one noticed the imperfections, because none of it needed to be perfect. It just needed to be real. Later that night, someone snapped a photo. Elise and Samuel stood beneath the sign for Thomas's place. She leaned her head on his shoulder, his arm wrapped around her. Beside them, on a small easel, stood a worn coat, framed, upright, eternal. That photo would go viral within days, not because they were famous, but because they were proof that something as small as a coat could become the seed of a new future, a new way to live, a new way to lead, a new way to love. At Hartwell Systems, things continued to change. People smiled more, took breaks without guilt, shared burdens instead of hiding them. Departments held monthly kindness circles not because it was required, but because it felt right. In the center of it all, Samuel never asked to be called anything but Sam. He kept a simple desk with second-hand books, a bowl of mints, and a handmade sign above his chair that read, "Kindness isn't weakness. It's wisdom." People came to him, from interns to top executives, not for answers but for reminders, to breathe, to believe, to remember who they were before the pressure. He didn't solve all their problems. He didn't need to. He reminded them they weren't alone. That was enough. Jonah thrived. He graduated with honors from his program in urban design. He took a job at a nonprofit that restored abandoned city lots into green spaces. His workbench at home was always cluttered with blueprints and seed packets and hope. One night, as he and Samuel sat on the porch watching the stars, Jonah said, "You know, I think about Mom sometimes. I think she'd be proud of us." Samuel nodded slowly. "She's the reason I kept going," he said. Jonah turned to him. "You're the reason I believed it was okay to keep hoping." They sat in silence for a long time, no words needed. Only presence. Elise and Samuel never tried to be a perfect couple. They had bad days, they disagreed, they forgot to buy milk, missed appointments, but they always came back to each other with softness, with patience, with the understanding that some love isn't loud, it's steady. They spent Sunday mornings reading in the sunroom, Thursday nights volunteering at the shelter. Their love was a rhythm, not a performance, and the world noticed. Not with applause, but with reflection. People began giving more, not just money, time, grace, eye contact. The coat, the same one that started it all, was eventually displayed in the Hartwell System's atrium permanently. Beneath it, etched in bronze, were the words, "You never know how far kindness will echo." And years later, when Samuel stood at the back of an auditorium where Jonah was speaking about urban renewal, he looked around at the filled seats, at the shining lights, at the photos of green gardens growing in broken neighborhoods. He smiled. He hadn't built skyscrapers, he hadn't launched an app, but he had built something else. A life from the ashes, from the cold, from one coat, one gesture, one choice to be kind when it was hardest. And it had changed everything. So if you're listening to this now, wherever you are, whoever you are, you don't need a grand plan, you don't need credentials or connections or a perfect life. You just need presence, you just need heart. Because the smallest act of kindness, the coat, the smile, the open seat, the listening ear, could become someone's lifeline, maybe even your own. Kindness doesn't wait for timing. It just shows up, and sometimes that's all it takes to rewrite a life.